In this video, I just want to go over the main idea behind Jetpack Compose very quickly, because I think there is a big misconception when it comes to Compose versus building UI with XML. So in the end, without going into details, that is what I will do in the internal section of this course, which comes much later, because you don't need to understand those internals in order to use and apply Compose UI. But in its core, you can think of Compose as a way to describe our UI using Kotlin. So if we take a look at this contact list screen here, for example, without again going into the details what all these components are. Hopefully you've watched the Compose crash course and these are at least familiar to you, but even if not, that's not necessary for this video. But as you can see on the right, this is the UI that this Kotlin code here results in. We do have layout like a column, which for example arranges child elements, child UI components in a column-wise fashion. So in this case, it would be our headline text, the context text, as well as our long list of contacts. We can then say we want to have a text with some spacing in between, and a lazy column, which is the Compose equivalent to a recycler view. And that's really already the basic idea of Jetpack Compose, that we can just describe our UI, what we want to see on the screen in which specific structure using Kotlin. So those are really just Kotlin functions, as you can see, and that is already a main difference compared to XML layouts. So if we take a look at the equivalent screen, using XML, for example, for a fragment, then we would also have a similar structure. We have maybe a linear layout, we have a text view here, and then, as I said, the equivalent for a lazy column here would be a recycler view. And then on the right, you can see this results in a very similar UI. But when you read and hear about Jetpack Compose versus XML, what most people tell you is that Jetpack Compose is a declarative UI framework, while XML is an imperative UI framework. And that's only partly true, because the claim behind calling Jetpack Compose a declarative UI framework is, as I said, we kind of declare how our UI looks like using Kotlin. So we declare and describe, hey, we want to have a column. Inside that column, we want to have a text, a spacer, a column. And if we compare this approach with building UI using XML, like here, you can see that's exactly the same structure. We also have a parent layout. We also have child UI components. They're just called differently. So building XML layouts is also declarative, because we also declare and describe how our UI looks like, just in a different language, in this case with XML. So that means so far, this and this is identical, at least in the approach and paradigm behind building that UI. But the main difference, why most people call the view system and XML layouts imperative, is the way we interact with these UI components, because that is really a core difference between Compose and XML. So while with a pure declarative UI framework, which Jetpack Compose is, we just give our UI components exactly the states that they need in order to render on the screen. So for a contact list screen, this might be our list of contacts. And we rather assign these states and these values that we want to display in our UI to our UI components. But it's not a very commanding way of assigning these states. So we don't really have real references to our composables here in code. Those are simply just functions. We can save a composable or so in a variable. While with XML, we work with these so-called views, which are in the end just classes in our code. And if we have a class, we can certainly also have an instance of a class, which we hold in memory in our code, in our activity, for example. And if we have an instance of something, we can also kind of command it to do something, to change its color. We can say a text.text color is equal to red now. So this is the imperative part about XML, but not how we build XML UI. It's really just that we can have references to our views, and we can then call functions on these to change their appearance. So if we really wanted to change the text color of this text view, then the Compose approach would be that we have a text color attribute here, and this field, where we currently hardcode the color, would be dynamic. That would be state. And we could change that from within our UI, we could change that from within view models, but in XML that works differently. In XML, we would get a reference to this view in our activity, in our fragment, for example, and then we would take this reference and say, text view, the text color is equal to red. And this simply does not work that way with Compose. So here we don't have real references to these UI components where we can say text.text color is equal to something else. No, here we would really just say color is our dynamic color state, for example. So this would just reflect some sort of color in Compose. And when we change this state from somewhere else, then our composable would update and re-render automatically to reflect that new color. So this is the main difference between Jetpack Compose and XML. So just to recap, building UI is declarative for both these types of UI building, but how we interact with our UI, that is what differs. But why does this pure declarative approach make Compose the superior framework? Well, at least in my experience is that for Jetpack Compose, we really just have a single source of UI, a single place where we need to change something if we want to change the appearance of a UI component. Well, with XML, I always found it to be a big hassle if we want to give a specific view, I don't know, rounded corners, if we want to give it a different background color, then there are lots of different places where we could possibly change something, we could possibly have an impact on the look of our UI, because that could be in our XML layout. That could be in some kind of background drawable resources that are separate XML files. But some of these attributes we can also only change from code. So we would need to get a reference to this view inside of our activity or fragment and change it there with Kotlin. So I always found this quite inconsistent and not intuitive where we needed to change something with XML. With Compose, that is a lot more intuitive, because if we want to change the appearance of this text, the only place where we need to do that is in this text composable. If we want to give this text a background with rounded corners, this is the place where we can do this. If we want to change the text, this is the place where we do this. If we change the text style, this is the place where we can do this. Even if we want to animate this text, this would be the place where we need to apply the animation. This is at least what I see as the main advantage from Jetpack Compose over XML. I know there are still people out there who call XML the superior approach, and that is fine if that works better for them. But I've been using Compose for 3.5 years now, and it's just so much more fun to build UIs with it. But I think especially over the course of this course, you will find out a lot more about the real advantages of Compose and how flexible it really is as a UI framework.